is really focusing on the assessment scale, Dr. Mike. I know this is, I'm personally very fascinated by the scale. I'd love to learn more about it. And, having heard about how successful it is and how many, institutions are adopting it, would like to learn a little bit, just in depth summary, if you like, about the tool and why it's now more important than ever that universities adopt such a scale in the age of AI.
Okay, so I think in a nutshell, we've got a range of things that have all led to the AI assessment scale sort of picking up and people running with this. When generative AI came out, this was a huge challenge for higher education institutions. People didn't know what to do. And essentially, they had three different ways that they could go about doing things. Now, the first one that many universities, especially in Australia, did, they were very quick to recognize this risk. And the group of eight universities, so the equivalent like the Russell Group in the UK, uh, jumped straight away to cancelling all take-home assessments. And they said, what we're going to do until we get a handle on this, we are going to go down an exam-only basis. Like, okay, great. So they suddenly said that assessment security was a very important topic. But as we've talked about before, assessment security is not the only thing. We do have to recognize assessment validity. And saying to students that we're only going to have exams, that means that their learning is very secure, but it's not necessarily very authentic. And then when you have students graduate and they're expected to carry out a task given a broader range of resources to draw on, are they going to have the full skills to be able to actually do that? So many universities say that one of their graduate outcomes or their graduate attributes is that students are really ready to engage with the world of work. And we can't say with all honesty that we're going to be supporting our students in the future world of work if we don't train them how to use tools like generative AI in an effective way. If all they're doing is using this in their personal lives, they're really not going to develop those skills to do something in a really effective manner for their future work. So we say, okay, well, we can't use exams for everything. But if we're going to use assessments, we want to know what the student's learning and what the student's not learning. So the thing that many institutions started to draw on is things like AI detection tools. And the challenge is that EdTech sort of came ahead and said, don't worry, universities, we've seen this rise of ChatGPT, and now we can save you from all these cheating students. So what we'll do is we've got this magical tool that will, with 99% accuracy, tell you or not whether a student has used generative AI in their work. And what we found from actual research that I've done along with colleagues and other researchers around the world is that these tools are nowhere near as accurate as they're claimed. Both false positives and false negatives, these accuracy rates are not true, just simply not true, and become even less accurate when we start to talk about specifically trying to hide the use of these tools. You know, students can go on TikTok and they can find 10 different ways that they can make sure that their assessment isn't picked up by whatever system their university is using. You know, AI humanizer tools, which will take the output of generative AI and change words in it in a way that will make it sound less like these patterns that you get from generative AI tools. And so suddenly then that means that we've got this arms race between a Gen AI detection tool and an AI humanizer. And now the Gen AI detection tools even have checks to say, has this been run through a humanizer? And it's just going to be this ongoing process. And that's not really what we want, especially from UK higher education. UK higher education relies a lot on trust that goes both ways, but we do have responsibilities to check that as well. So if we can't go back to exams for everything, and if we can't rely on a technological method to detect whether or not students are actually using these tools, What can we do instead? Well, we've got to think of some way that we can actually have this form of integration of generative AI tools into our assessments. And the AI assessment scale is one way that we've developed to help support educators to actually do this. And it works by doing two main things. The first thing it does is it offers a framework for educators to redesign their assessments based on their learning objectives, what they're trying to achieve from a specific form of assessment, and saying, how much will students using Gen AI tools for this assessment cause this learning outcome to be more or less met? And based upon the answers to that question, we can say, well, there may then be ways that we want to integrate Gen AI into this assessment. And in some cases, this may be to a very high degree. In other cases, this might be to a much lower degree. And that gives us these sort of base levels to work from. And secondly, it opens up a conversation between the students and educators, because I mentioned about this concept of trust in higher education. That is really important to have. And being able to have open conversations with students about these are my expectations for you, and this is how I think you should be acting, is a really clear way to help support academic integrity. Now, academic integrity has been shown time and time again that if you have a broad culture of academic integrity, this is going to be more effective than sort of plagiarism checking systems. Because if you instill in students a belief in what they're actually doing is going to be right, this is going to be really helpful. Now, some skeptics would say, no, we've got to have both. And I would probably agree. We do need both sides of that coin. We've got to have some sort of checks and balances, but trust is also something that's really important. So the AI assessment scale, it's a 5-level system where we go from having no AI, and as we say, we can have some form of a secured assessment, and then we move throughout the different levels of the scale. Maybe we say we're going to design an assessment which is focused on AI planning. So you ask students to carry out some planning activities, and the goal is to assess the end result. It's not to assess where these ideas came from. It's assessing the ability of the students to understand which ideas are effective, which ideas are not effective, and combine that together into a piece of work. We may then move beyond that and say, well, we're going to say, yes, you can use AI for some certain tasks like drafting text or revising text or reviewing material. But what's important here is your critical evaluation. We're not trying to say which words did you write and which words did the AI tool write. We're trying to address a more broader focus on how has AI been used here to help support your work. And we might do this through reflective statements, through transparency statements, disclosure statements. But what's important is that the student's able to have a bit of an evaluation as to whether or not what the AI tool is producing is correct. But for that, we've got to adjust our grading levels as well. If we know that students have access to more sources, then we expect students to do better. And I think one of the challenges that we've seen is when educators just say, okay, yeah, you can use AI, but then they keep their same old grading standards. And what that can lead to is grade inflation and degrading of degree programs. We've already seen in the UK this constant rise in the number of the first class degrees that are being awarded. And there's been calls by sectors to say, is this really appropriate? Do we want this continued grade inflation? Now, as we get higher up the levels of the AI assessment scale, move into saying, well, we can actually have cases where the students can be using full AI. So in a full AI assessment, this would be where there would probably be some sort of an expectation or a demand that students do use Gen AI tools to achieve certain aspects of their work. Maybe that's using specific prompts, getting them to put in a prompt into ChatGPT and sharing the link to that prompt so you can see how well the student has worked with this activity. Maybe it's doing specific forms of creation like multimodal generation. So text generation, yeah, sure. But what about video generation? What about digital avatar creation? What about voice creation? How can students integrate these effectively into a multimedia presentation in a short amount of time that really wouldn't have been possible to do without access to these tools. And then at the final level of the scale, we have this AI exploration, this sort of cutting edge level that we say we're now going to be moving towards this bigger case use where we say, what are the biggest problems that we're facing? How can we design an assessment with students that involves some sort of a co-creation, looking at the cutting edge of generative AI tools? So we say, this is a case where students are really trying to explore how well these tools can be used to do something. And therefore, one of the learning objectives would be related specifically to generative AI tools. Again, I think it's important to differentiate between what the student knows and what the AI tool can do. And we shouldn't be saying that we should be doing everything at a very high level of AI tools. We've got to have some sort of appropriate use case. But also, when you give an assessment to a student, and you can say you can use AI for this or you can use AI for that, that is not good enough because students will ignore you. You say, here's my assessment. Now you can only use AI for planning. And a student will go, yeah, sure. And then they'll just do the whole thing using AI. So it's not about relying on students to sort of meet our criteria. What it really is important is about redesigning assessment. And I think that is the challenge that many universities face because assessment redesign is a difficult thing to do. How many hours have you both spent designing assessments and thinking, how can I write this assessment in a way that's going to support my students? Well, then add in generative AI, where sometimes you're going to have educators who aren't experts in this, and this becomes a really, really big ask for many people. But it's something that universities have got to deal with. And from BUV, we deal with this through continuous faculty training, supporting people in how to redesign assessments for generative AI and using the AI assessment scale in an effective way to design an assessment that supports student validity and assessment validity, but also allows for effective student learning. And that's where we have this sort of balance. So that's the AI assessment scale in a bit of a nutshell, why we need to do these systems and some of the challenges that universities face and what these tools actually are. All of this information is available on our website, aiassessmentscale.com. We've got multiple peer-reviewed papers exploring these topics in different details and a whole range of resources available on our website if people are interested in adapting this scale, which is a Creative Commons scale and can be freely adapted, changed, translated using whichever context you would like.